Hello dear viewers, welcome to the Dr. Renuka David Wellness Show. It was a privilege for me to be in conversation with Dr. Shashi Tharoor a couple of days ago. I realized and learned that apart from being a politician, he was extremely well read, an orator, a speaker and a globetrotter. He was extremely witty too, and I could prompt out sides of him which we had never heard before. I realized he was a singer. I realized that he was an extremely humble and a very gentle soul. I'd love to begin my conversation with you with my first question. You've been a NRI longer than you've stayed in India.
That's true.
So it would be interesting to know, in your perception, how India has changed living here, then living abroad over the years.
Well, I left before some of you were born. I left in 1975 to go to graduate school in the States. And though I used to come back annually for holidays here and visiting my parents and so on, I really moved back only at the very end of 2008, early 2009. And I must say that in many ways it was an India transformed. First, the most visible things, and those of you who are slightly closer to my vintage will remember that we were a country where imports were very rare, we were self-sufficient, the only cars on the roads were Ambassadors and Fiats, and the visual transformation into a country where literally, we have been globalized, our economy has been globalized, is certainly very striking. And not to mention, of course, the fact that NRIs always used to be solicited for bringing back suitcases full of foreign consumer goods, which you couldn't get in India, and now that's no longer required because obviously everything is available here. I think the other thing is, though poverty still persists in our country, there's very much less of it, and I think that is more and more visible. Beggars, for example, were a far more ubiquitous sight in the India I grew up in than the India I've come back to. On the negative side, everything from corruption to traffic has got much worse. I am pleased to say that when I was a child, I think it was entirely possible for my family to claim that it had never been involved in any corrupt acts during my childhood. But by the time I started coming back, bribes started needing to be paid for all sorts of things that in the past were considered routine services, from getting a telephone connection, I'm talking about the 80s and early 90s, to even buying movie tickets in a full house. The black market had grown, bribes seemed to be widely required, and that was a bit chastening to come back and see the extent to which that's happened. And then I came into a profession where, alas, there is even more of that sort of thing than one would want to see in a democracy. So there have been a few negatives as well, but the thing about India is everything gets better and worse at the same time. So I think one can look at the evident prosperity, the self-confidence of the society, the aspirations of the youth, the visible signs of liberalization, all of that as positives. And one can look at some of these things, the traffic, the corruption, the cheapening of public discourse, all of that as negative.
You have been a diplomat for 23 years in the United Nations.
29, I'm afraid.
29, sorry, I stand corrected. Served in various capacities. We know that the United Nations, according to your own words, stands for a world in which different nations and cultures look at each other as potential partners pursuing common objectives. Well, in 2006, you were chosen as India's official candidate for the post of Secretary General, a moment of pride for all of us Indians. And then you decided to come back to India, campaign in your mundu in the hot streets of Kerala, to win this amazing election in 2009. Quite a contrasting picture of a UN diplomat, three-suited, sitting in his AC office, to an Indian politician. So how did this happen? What was the urge? And what is your definition, the three definitions of the NRI?
Oh, okay. That's a lot of questions in one. But on the how did it happen, first of all, you are, as usual, too kind. You left out all the bad stuff. So, yes, I was the official candidate, but I also lost. And losing is what brought me back, in the sense that though I did come rather close by just 2 votes to Ban Ki-moon, as Groucho Marx used to say, close but no cigar. So I didn't get the cigar, and though he was gracious enough to invite me to remain, I felt it more appropriate not to cast a shadow on the person who had won the post, and was better to come back and try and do something different. So that's very simply the reason for the choice. I did actually spend an intervening year and a bit in the private sector as a consultant to a company that was trying to promote investments into India, and to itself explore investments in India. But I found that I was basically rather unmoved by the bottom line. That never was what motivated me. And so the opportunity to instead come and make a difference to my own country, as I had tried to make a difference on the global arena, was, I thought, worth doing, and that's why I came back. But you're right, the transformation was quite something. In fact, my political opponents at the time in that election, my principal opponents are the communists, who had held a seat in the 2 previous elections. And they went around saying essentially that, look at this chap, he's used to sitting in air-conditioned offices in suits and ties. How can he speak for us? How can he represent us? He barely speaks the language, all of this stuff. So that actually turned out to be the easiest campaign to refute, because I was quite comfortable in a munda and kurta. I used to wear one on previous visits home, and I would happily trudge from corner to corner and shop to shop and field to field in the hot sun of April, hottest month of the year in Kerala. And I would speak to them in Malayalam and say, they say I can't speak Malayalam, but, and it's true, I really can't speak the flowery Sahitya Malayalam of all the political speech makers. But as you can see, I speak enough Malayalam to understand your hopes and your problems and your needs. And far more important than Malayalam, I can speak English and Hindi to get your voices heard in Delhi, which is what they needed. And that turned out to be a very effective argument. I did win by a record majority, and they didn't try that stunt against me again. But you also left out the fact that my second election wasn't quite so easy. I scraped through, I had won by a lack of votes the first time. And in the height of the BJP Modi wave last election, I scraped through by 15,700. It was a much tougher election. And the BJP came second, not the communists. So it's a 3-cornered constituency. And the challenge I face in the next 6 months is precisely to keep my head above not one, but 2 rivals for that seat. On the NRI issue, I did live abroad for a very long time, because in addition to those 29 years at the UN, I had 3 years as a graduate student. And then, as I said, a year and a half, almost 2 afterwards. So cumulatively, almost 34 years of my life were spent abroad, and that's still more than half my life. So it is a rather long stint of being an NRI. So in one of my books, India from Midnight to the Millennium, I asked the question whether NRI, for non-resident Indian, stands for not really Indian or never relinquished India, because in fact there is a little bit of both. In most of the Desi expatriates you meet, they have in some respects become more like the countries they're living in rather than Indians themselves, but in other respects they haven't let go. And even if they've changed their passports, their hearts are very much still in India. Then as we continued working with NRIs, and the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas took off, and these various awards and engagements with the NRI community, their investments in India increased, and they also became very influential lobbyists for us in the countries where they were living. I said in a new article later, actually, maybe we should simply call them the National Reserve of India.
That's the third coining, National Reserve of India. This is a question which I have coined suitably, just for the comfort level for all of us. We are aware that you have been through a lot of ups and downs, not only in your professional life, but in your private life. You've been under the national scanner for a very long time, and yet you have been managing this resultant stress so admirably. It's actually admirable, because every time I've been reading your tweets, I've been reading about you, there are a lot of people trolling about your personal life, but yet I see you admirably handling the stress well. So what are your, how do you manage the stress so well?
Well, I think honestly the only thing that helps is a clear conscience. When you know that the various things you're being attacked for are simply not true. and that the malice, jealousy, hostility, envy of others is more their problem than yours, you learn to ignore it. It didn't come easily. Initially, like everybody else in this room would be, I was also terribly hurt by being suspected of things I was incapable of doing, and worse, being accused of things I was incapable of doing. And initially, your reaction is to lash back and defend yourself, and then you realize that actually is the point, and that's what they want you to do. So part of being in public life in the country today, particularly in this venomous era of social media, has been growing a thicker skin. You know, when I was at the UN, my late boss, Kofi Annan, the then Secretary General, once told me a Ghanaian proverb his father had taught him. And I couldn't understand it. He said, the proverb is, when the sharks bite you, do not bleed. Now, the Ghana being a coastal state, I suppose you went out swimming and the sharks were there. But I couldn't understand, how if the sharks bite you, of course you bleed. How will you not bleed? And then I came here and went through all these Agni Parikshas, and I realized what he meant. That when these nasty, malicious, frankly evil people bite you, if you bleed, that is, if you show them you are suffering, you are actually giving them exactly what they want. The sharks bite you because they want your blood. If you refuse to bleed, the sharks might one day lose interest in biting you. This hasn't happened yet in my case. They're still biting me. But for that, as I say, you know, having a clear conscience helps. Having some faith in oneself and what one is and one's own integrity, that helps. And then I was reminded of a bit of advice I got from Mr. Natwar Singh, who had given up a career in the Indian Foreign Service to become a minister. And he was recounting to me how when he was sworn in by Mrs. Indira Gandhi, he was wearing a Western suit. So he very apologetically said to her, Mrs. Gandhi, I get some bangalas stitched. And she said, no, Natwar, you better grow a thicker skin. And that piece of advice has lasted with me since.
Dr. Tharoor, I have really greatly admired the stirring speech you won at the Oxford Union debate. This 8-minute speech actually, I think, touched a lot of Indians' life, and it did a lot of soul searching. I guess not only for us Indians, but also I guess it showed the present British their past. So how did this actually, I also read that you were not very happy with the response because you had made better speeches, and then you were surprised how the 8-minute thing got so viral. So was it the reason of this book that you wrote after that, and what is the urge behind this?
Actually, it was just accidental. I was actually going to the UK for another reason, the annual Hay on Wye Literature Festival, which is one of the, perhaps the biggest literature festival in the English-speaking world until Jaipur came along. And it really is a lovely event. I've been going there on and off for over 25 years. So they invited me, and I was going to go there. And then Oxford, perhaps hearing I was coming, wrote asking if I'd participate in their union debate on the topic, their topic, not mine, does Britain owe reparations, or Britain does owe reparations to her former colonies. Now, I usually live with my sister in London, and she said, we can drive to Hay via Oxford, it's not even out of the way. So I said, fine. And I went there, and it was a fun occasion because you speak in this very imposing 16th century oak-paneled room, and there's all these stiff formalities and so on. And the debate usually has one student on each side and three, adults or celebrities or VIPs or whatever they are, relating to the topic. And the topic was of interest to me because it gave me an opportunity to vent on British colonialism. So I said, fine. I went there and I said I'll speak, obviously, for the motion, not because I was a fan of reparations. I'm not, because reparations are a monetary idea, and I don't think you can put a monetary value on the enormous lives lost, the 35 million Indians who died, unnecessary deaths and British-made famines, the vast amount of loot and rapine and pillage that took place, the destruction of Indian industries, handicrafts, cotton, linen, muslin, all of that took place under the British. And so I said, reparations were not my thing. In fact, even in my speech, I said, if you were to give £1 a year in reparations for 200 years to make up for 200 years of wrongdoing, that might be a case of moral atonement that would be more useful to all of us. But anyway, so I didn't go for the reparations, but to lay the case out against colonialism. I had a great time, and we did so well with the audience that in Oxford they vote by moving into two lobbies. So the people who vote for the motion after listening to the debate move into one lobby, and the ones who oppose it move into another. And practically everybody wanted to go into the lobby supporting our motion, with the result that the reception afterwards got delayed by half an hour because everyone was trying to squeeze into one room. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the debate went fine. Then I went off to Hay and forgot about it. 3 weeks later, the Oxford Union put the debate on YouTube, and they happened to have each individual speech in its own slot on YouTube rather than the entire debate together. So I retweeted my bit, and to my astonishment, I just watched it go viral. I mean, within I think 24 hours, about 3 million people had viewed it.
What is the secret of this time management? I actually wonder whether God has created a special 28-hour capsule just for you.
I wish he would, actually, or she would. No, I mean, the truth is that I don't sleep enough. I tend to have very long days, as any Lok Sabha MP will tell you. Your time is not your own. People constantly make demands on you all day long. So the only time that those demands stop is sort of after 10:30, 11 at night. And that's when I tend to sit down and write. I wasn't a late night person. I used to be an early morning person. But I realized that if I really want to be writing undisturbed, it has to be at night, and that's when I do it. I also write on planes. I write in all sorts of odd circumstances whenever I can, because that writing is important to me, and so I make it a point to do that. But it's also true, to paraphrase an American humorist of the 1940s, A.J. Liebling, who said, "I write better than anyone who writes faster, and I write faster than anyone who writes better." So that's that's also part of the answer.
Dr. Tharoor, Indian politicians are pretty shy to use the social media, but you are the most followed leader in the social media. I've been literally following you for the past 3 months, and you're the most followed.
Mr. Modi overtook me 5 years ago, so he's way ahead, way ahead.
So it also comes with the flip side of the trolls you got to face. So in your opinion, with all the disruptions in technology and overuse and effects of addiction of social media, is this media really a boon or a bane, especially recently with the Me Too campaign?
Well, on the social media generally, I would say that it's both a boon and a pain. It's certainly a boon in the sense that it's given us a new public square, a new public space where ideas can be exchanged, information can be shared, people are able to catch on to what's on other people's minds. There are young people now who don't bother reading newspaper anymore. They just look at the links their friends are tweeting, and they get their sense of what's happening in the world. So all of that, I would say, broadly speaking, is a boon. On the pain front is the viciousness and trollery out there, which Twitter partly enables because of its permission to anonymity. Facebook, you can't be anonymous. At least you have to construct a pretty impressive fake profile that looks like a real person. Whereas on Twitter, you can have an egg for a picture and an absurd name, and you can just shoot abuses at people and nothing can be done. So the problem with that side of it is that it's brought out an awful lot of unpleasantness to which in the normal course of life, none of us would be or needs to be exposed. And that unpleasantness is something which we have to live with as the price of being on social media. The only consolation is that, what people used to think or say behind your back, somebody's now saying openly. So you know all the worst things that can be said about you because you can read them on your timeline in the morning. Whereas in real life, as we all know, people do gossip about you, people do mutter untruths about you or repeat rumors they've heard and so on. Human beings are like that. So in the past, it used to happen quietly, and so at least openly to your face, you were able to live a civilized existence. Today, instead of that happening, or maybe in addition to that happening, it's also mirrored in all the nastiness on social media. As for Me Too, I've actually tweeted this morning my views on it because the clamor for my views was mounting to a point where I felt I should address it. Number one, I think it's not just about creepy sexual misbehavior, which it is, but it's also about differential power equations. Because if you look at these Me Too stories, all about producers and directors versus actresses. It's editors versus reporters, It's employers and bosses versus employees. So when you think about that power equation, what these people are doing is to try to exploit that differential in power sexually. And that's monstrous. It really is not acceptable. From the point of view of the victims, very often they're told, you let it go, let it be, brush it under the carpet, don't jeopardize your career, don't jeopardize your reputation. And that becomes so unfair to them. So social media, particularly with the safety of some years later, enables them to do the one thing to their tormentors that was done to them, which is to bring shame into the equation. You shame them publicly as they made you feel ashamed and guilty and miserable when you were younger. And I can fully understand why social media has been used to advance the Me Too issue. But the solution lies well beyond social media. It lies in really helping change our own culture into one in which we instill from a very young age respect for the equality, the dignity, the autonomy of women in the schools, in our homes, and in our workplaces. We haven't got there yet. And I think one advantage of this Me Too movement is that consciousness has been raised to a point where we can move in that direction very systematically.
Women are most of the time, I would not say 100% of the time, because I think today the scenario is changing and women are doing extremely well. As my husband says, whenever he walks into a boardroom in a banking meeting, everyone would be sitting, waiting for the chairperson to come, and in walks that woman, the head of the board. So that's happening, but most of the time, women are underpaid, underutilized, and often undervalued. Will you like to change this at any point of time?
I think we can change it, first of all, by law, by making it illegal not to have equal pay for equal work. I think the only pay differential should be related to the kind of work you're doing and not to your gender. So that is something that's worth giving a thought to. Actually, when you said it, it suddenly struck me, I'm not sure there is a law. And if these employers aren't in violation of the law. But if indeed you're looking at inequality in compensation, then certainly we should fix that. But the other thing is obviously that we don't want to pass laws that act as a disincentive for women's employment. I remember some women telling me when some friends of mine wanted to make maternity leave, paid maternity leave, a 9-month thing. And they said, don't do that, because then men will never hire us. Employers will never hire us, men or women, because they'll say, now we've got to pay a 9-month salary for somebody who won't be working. Why should we? Better to hire a man who may not be as good, but who actually will never take that leave. So that kind of thing becomes a consideration. We need to ensure equality, but we need to make sure that benefits are balanced in such a way that they don't become a disincentive to hire women.
The 3 magical mantras which have dictated your approach to life.
Well, as a parent, you always develop these mantras for your kids. I'm not sure you can really apply them for yourself. But the first one I always just tell my kids is never give up. I just say that, ultimately try. As long as you've made the effort, then you can't be blamed. But if you don't try, that's unforgivable. So never give up. Another one was be true to yourself. And I even still say a version of that when I address high school and college graduates. I say that, basically be the best you that you can be. Nobody else can be a better you than you are, right? So be the best you that you can be true to yourself. You should know your own talents and your own abilities, and once you know them, then certainly it seems to me that you can at least attempt to fulfill them. Not everybody has the same level of talent, ability. Not everybody can come first in class. Not everybody can win the fastest race or sing the best song or even crack the best joke, but everybody has some talent. And if they can do that and do that well enough, and if they can do it in a way that at least makes them feel they haven't let themselves down, then it seems to me we have no business to expect anything more of any human being than that. And of course, the third one is the perennial favorite, which all of you doctors, I think, even swear an oath to, do no harm. Ultimately, none of us is necessarily going to make the world or the planet a better place for having been in it. But let's not at least make it a worse place. Let's not harm others. Let's not do things that willfully cause damage to other human beings. And thereafter, do what you want.
Dear viewers, how was it? Amazing, isn't it? And what a lovely voice. And there were aspects that we didn't know about him earlier. I'm sure you also found it as extremely inspirational from this very intellectual person who's been so well read and extremely motivating. Well, friends, have a great week ahead. Stay radiant, stay blessed, and always keep smiling. I'll see you next week. Goodbye.